I remember the panic attacks, the debilitating anxiety, the sense that everything I loved was crumbling. For months, I coped in any way I could, moving from medications to unhealthy drinking. This kind of emotional crisis, the sense that something inside of us is wrong, this is rapidly becoming the norm. Now I wonder, is it possible that we're all living with systems of habits that are perfectly designed to produce this kind of life? The modern world is a habit formation machine. We wake up and we scroll social media. From waiting in line at the grocery store to stopping at a red light, we fill every idle moment with technology. We spend our day distracted by notifications. We rarely sit down to talk face to face. We rarely take time to rest. The problem with all these habits is not that any one of them is so bad, it's that they're all unconscious. This technological life, the one that was supposed to set us free, actually enslaves us to meaningless lives of distraction. What if instead we designed habits that pushed us towards a life of meaning and love? Isn't that what we're meant for?
There are few deeper satisfactions than throwing yourself headlong into good work. In The Common Rule, Justin Earley notes this paradox about work. Anything worth doing requires bending your whole life toward it. On the other hand, nothing is worth bending your life until it breaks. Now, this is the tension that we're walking into today. It's totally possible for us to get caught up in the busyness of this life, things like work and activities and athletics and side hustles and chores. These are good things. They're important things. These tasks and activities, they can be tremendously rewarding and satisfying pursuits unless they break you. And nothing is worth bending your life until it breaks. Work is a good thing. There are two great glories of work, focusing and finishing. I love the days when I get into something, maybe it's writing a sermon or meeting with people, and the time just flies by as I engage deeply in my work. There's a pleasure in focusing and a delight in a busy day at work where you feel useful and important and like what you're doing matters in some way. I love that feeling. We were made to produce and impact and shape the world around us, and so that focus is a gift. It's immersing yourself fully in something, and it's wonderful. Focusing is glorious. And at the same time, completing something is intoxicating. I love to finish things. I love completing a sermon and knowing it's finished. I love checking an item off a to-do list. I love leaving a successful meeting that I enjoyed and where we accomplished a lot. I love finishing things so much that I'll sometimes create a to-do list for my work day or even for my day off, just for the joy of crossing things off. Finishing is glorious. And maybe this focusing and finishing stuff is why parenting feels so challenging. Like, we never can fully focus on it, and like the work of parenting is never done. Here's our first question for discussion, and it's about focusing and finishing. When was a recent time you experienced the satisfaction of focusing or of finishing something? Let's discuss that. Work is a good thing, but not if our busyness breaks us. Throughout the past month, we've been talking about putting limits on our lives that give us greater freedom. We're pursuing some new habits that help us to resist the wrong things and embrace the right things. And so today, we're going to cultivate another habit, a regular pattern of living that gives us a healthy, God-honoring rhythm of life. Throughout this series, the Common Rule Challenge, we've been working on 8 habits. These are habits that form and shape us in ways that God intends for us. We've looked at daily habits around prayer and meals and our phone and scripture. We've looked at weekly habits of conversation and reducing our media consumption and fasting. Our final habit is a weekly habit of rest or Sabbath. In the beginning. As soon as I say that phrase, I hope it takes you to Genesis 1, to the start of the Bible. God created. And God pronounced everything in his creation as good. Then there was evening. Now in Genesis 1, that happens 6 times where God creates and then there's evening. And then on the 7th day, God stopped. He did nothing. He rested in the completion of his work. And this rhythm of working and then resting, it's embedded into the fabric of who we are as image bearers of God. Focusing and finishing, well, those are built into who we are. And the problem we encounter today is that we're really good at the focusing part of work, but we're not so good at the consistent rhythmic pauses where we finish and we rest. And maybe there's a reason for that difficulty. None of us like our limits. We don't. There are so many ways limits can play out for us. We'll push against the limits of how much sleep we need. I've done that. We'll push against our physical limitations. Guilty, I've done that too. We'll push against the limits of our brain and the abilities that we have. I've done that. We'll push against our inadequacies and our need for rest. And maybe you're sensing a theme. I've done that too. We want to be like a machine where everything works perfectly every time, all the time. And well, that discontent with limits can be a dangerous thing that takes us back to that creation story in the Garden of Eden where Adam and Eve weren't content to be like God, but they wanted to be God with the knowledge of good and evil. You see, Adam and Eve didn't like the limits and, well, it got them into trouble. And that's our story today too, pushing back against limits to the detriment of our health and of our souls and of our minds and of our bodies. And maybe that's the tough thing about limits. Limits remind us that God is God and we are not. So we push the limits. And one of the ways we push the limits is through our busyness. Have you noticed how less and less in our culture you find a 7th day of rest? Businesses are now open 7 days a week. We recently welcomed a new business here in Potterville, Just Wood and Steel. Have you seen their sheds as you drive through Potterville? They're amazing. I got to admit, I kind of want one. Maybe here at the church. In talking with the guys running the business, I was a bit taken back by their bragging about working 7 days a week. And they told me, well, that's what it takes to make their business thrive. So they're working hard and, well, the business is doing well. I get that. But what about our souls? What about our limits? What about our health? Working 7 days a week is becoming more and more common to the point where taking a day off is seen at best quaint and, well, at worst scandalous. I love the way Justin writes about his experience at work. Once I was giving a talk, he says, to a conference room of 60 or 70 new young lawyers at my firm. And when I told them that in order to be good lawyers in the long run, they need to cultivate a habit of taking 1 day off every week, you could have heard a pin drop. It was as if I was speaking of a scandal. They were intrigued, maybe hoping that they could hear more, but at the same time wondering if a senior partner of the firm who was standing next to me was going to yank me off the stage. I got the sense that if I had been more like my former self and told them new ways to life hack the need for sleep away, they would have nodded in solemn approval while dying just a little bit more inside. Here's the thing, we don't like our limits. None of us like our limits, but when we push through them, there's a cost to our body and to our souls. So let's talk about that dislike or frustration over limits. When was a time you experienced frustration over your limits? Let's discuss that. The new badge of status in our culture is busyness. If you're busy, you are important and you matter, or at least that's what we're telling ourselves. It's as if stopping and resting is a sign of weakness or of poor stewardship or something. It's as if we honestly think it's immoral to rest. The more important you are, well, the more demands there are on your time, right? And so those who really matter, they don't have time for rest. And this is toxic to our bodies. Our bodies are not machines. We do have physical limitations, all of us, but it's more than that. Our busyness also disguises a need that our souls have as well for rest. The rest for our souls, well, that's not a nap. The rest our souls need is to realize that we're important and we matter despite our limitations. Soul rest is realizing we don't have anything to prove to anyone. We don't have to prove that we're important. All too often, we think we can work hard and work our way in our schoolwork, and our job, and our athletics, and our activities to achieve significance. We allow our busyness to define us. We allow what we do to show that we matter, and we look to others to approve and to validate us. And this stuff gets me fired up today because, well, I see this bad habit of busyness and finding our worth and our value in our work in myself. And I see it all the time in people around me. This is how we're raising our kids, with overly scheduled lives filled with school and with activities and with sports and with enrichment. And well, most of us have bought into the cultural ideal of a lack of limits. We've bought it hook, line, and sinker, and there's a cost there. There's a cost to our physical bodies, but more alarmingly, a cost to our souls. You see, we need the gospel. We need the good news of Jesus. And rest isn't just a Genesis 1 thing about our bodies. We work and then we rest. Rest is a salvation thing. Rest is a reminder that Jesus has done the work for us and he's finished it. Yes, God rests in the beauty of creation, but the book of Hebrews also tells us that God rests in the work of redemption. The good news of the gospel is that Jesus has done everything needed to unite us back to the God who loves us. There's not a single thing that we can add to that work, but there is everything to receive. In Jesus, the work is finished. God's redemptive work shouts to us, you're important and you matter despite your limitations. We will not find true rest until we begin to believe that this is true. We will not find true rest until our habits begin to form us toward that truth. So we enter here our final habit, a weekly habit of practicing Sabbath. Let's explore this a bit, and then we'll land on some practical suggestions for this habit. A proper Sabbath is, well, it's much more about doing than about not doing. Yes, your body may need rest, and that's important. If for Sabbath you need a nap, take it. But Sabbath is really about doing restful things. It's recognizing that our souls need more than to do nothing. We need to do restful things. So here's an irony for you. Real rest takes real work. That's an irony, isn't it? As I've been telling you all along, work is good. And well, here's a way we can point our work in healthy, soul-caring directions. Sabbath is doing worshipful and engaging activities. Sabbath is doing things that draw us closer to God and to others. Rest can be good for our friendships. Rest can be enjoying God's creation. Rest and Sabbath, well, they're going to look different for different people. Rest and Sabbath, they aren't about rules, but they are about finding things that restore your soul. Rest and Sabbath remind you that you are loved and enough, just as you are. I love the wisdom of Abraham Heschel, a rabbi during the civil rights movement, who said, a man, or a woman, I would add, who works with his mind should Sabbath with his hands. A man who works with his hands should Sabbath with his mind. I primarily work with my mind as a pastor. I'm constantly thinking and processing and listening and engaging. And given what Rabbi Heschel says, it's no surprise that I find rest and restoration in hiking. I love walking mile after mile out in nature, and I find that restores my soul. Real rest takes real work. And what works for me for Sabbath rest might not work for you. We're tempted when it comes to rest to think of rest as checking out or going for the mindless consumption of media through a show or through a movie. And we've suggested that creating media consumption, because, well, media consumption is just that, it's consumption. It's like mindless eating. We eat with purpose for our health, and it's the same with our Sabbath rest. We rest with purpose. If we're going to do that, we better find something that just doesn't allow us to check out, but actually restores our soul. Maybe for you, it's baking, or writing, or Wordle, or reading, or card games with friends, or sitting over a meal with family, or gardening, or exercising. The point is not a specific activity or thing you're doing. It's about resting in the being enough through Jesus. Let's reflect on this idea of activities that restore your soul. Here's a question for you. What is something that you do that restores your soul? Take a moment to discuss that. Sabbath won't look the same for everyone, and Sabbath won't look the same throughout your life. Sabbath changes as life changes. So I have usually found that home improvement projects are a source of rest and restoration for me. But that changed this past fall when we remodeled our kitchen. It was such a big project that I found it was really, really hard work. That I needed to Sabbath from that work. Home improvement used to bring me rest, and I found with that project, it didn't. I needed to find other ways to rest. This reminds me of when our children were younger. Jan and I rested differently when we had young kids. You can't just take a break from your children, right? And it's important to remember in those seasons that Sabbath changes as life changes. So there are seasons of life where maybe we have a sick parent or a newborn or a tough new job or something else that makes rest and Sabbath difficult. This is where it's important to remember that habits are bigger than the exceptions. So developing a rhythm of Sabbath is the rule, it's the habit. And that means those seasons where life is different are just that. They're seasons. A routine is the normal that defines our life, not the season, not the exception. Sabbath changes as life changes, but the routine is rest in Sabbath. And in those busy seasons of life, this practice becomes all that much more important. Our bodies need it. Our souls need it. And we can't Sabbath alone. Communal Sabbath changes everything. When we're going through a busy season, or our relationships in our community make a huge difference. Community helps us to bear our burdens together. Many hands make the work lighter. And that's true of parenting. That's true of caring for a sick loved one. That's true of life in general. And depending on your life stage, you have something to offer that might help create Sabbath for someone else. I know for a fact we're not all busy and overworked, but what if we as a community came alongside each other, alongside our children or our grandchildren, and we shared the load together to find Sabbath together? That's powerful stuff. Now, as you may know, if you follow me on social media, Kevin, my friend and our worship leader here in Potterville, he did a ton of work with me on our kitchen. And guess what having Kevin help did? It lightened the load for me. It was way less work with two of us. Community creates Sabbath. And what you probably don't know is that Kevin's wife, Rebecca, also helped us out with some meals while our kitchen wasn't functional. And guess what that did? It lightened the load for us. It lightened the load for my family. Community creates Sabbath. Here's a different spin on that Rabbi Heschel quote. Someone whose work is parenting may Sabbath with email writing. Someone whose work is email writing may Sabbath while parenting. We need people who are older and younger and married and single and in different places in life, working and interacting together. We are at our best when we're intergenerational. We are at our best when we have a beauty of diversity. Sabbath is made better with community. Communal Sabbath changes everything. If you view the Sabbath only as an individual practice, then maybe you're doing it wrong. Now, the thing about the Sabbath is that you don't get better at it by accident. And that's why we're focusing throughout this series on habits. These are repeated actions that take practice. And let me tell you, starting this practice of Sabbath, it may seem like an insurmountable hurdle to get over. So let's talk about some practical tips for finding Sabbath. The first practical tip is to pick a day and communicate it to the people around you. Now, guess what's involved in this first step? It's not snacks, though it's almost as good. It's clear expectations. I love clear expectations, almost as much as snacks. We need the reinforcement of people recognizing that we are practicing Sabbath. If you choose a Sabbath, don't be afraid to communicate it to the people around you. Now, when I say pick a day, I mean pick a 24-hour period. In an ideal world, we would all Sabbath on the same day in the same 24-hour period, but well, that's not the world we live in. So pick a day that works for you and works for your family. And maybe an ideal might be from sundown on Saturday to sundown on Sunday. The important thing is to pick a day and then communicate that day to people who need to know or who are going to practice Sabbath with you. Now, after briefly trying to make Saturday my Sabbath during the pandemic, I'm back to Fridays. I take Friday off from my labors, and that means I don't answer my email. I don't answer church-related text or phone calls, well, unless it's an emergency. And I set myself apart from my work. I'll get back to you, usually on Saturday, and I do that in order to rest and, well, maybe hike. That doesn't mean I don't do anything and that I sleep all day on Friday. It means I rest from the work of being a pastor, and it means I'll get back to you, most likely on Saturday, when I pick those things back up again. I want you to pick a day and communicate it to the people around you. And by the way, Pastor Tom's day off, his is Saturday. Now I admit here that I'm reluctant to give myself as an example of this because, well, it's really easy to dismiss what I'm doing as something that just a pastor does. And I refuse to tell all of you to do something that I won't do myself. But it'd be a mistake to think that just pastors or just, super spiritual people take a Sabbath. That's what God intended for all of us. So pick a day and communicate with your work, with your friends, with your family, what your Sabbath day is. And that communication is important because community and relationships make a huge difference in our Sabbath practice. To find rest, we need to divide up labor and help each other out. Sabbath isn't just about resting so someone else can do all the work for you. Parents, make your children help out and pitch in so that you can get some rest, particularly as your children get older and can help more. Find ways to partner with other people on Sabbath to make the load lighter. Coordinate your Sabbath with someone else. And second, here's a second tip, is recognize your limits. When you try to Sabbath, what you're going to realize is that it's hard to do. There's going to be some barrier that you're going to encounter in practicing Sabbath. And one of the most common barriers for busy people is this realization: I can't get it all done. Maybe it's the laundry or the grocery shopping or the yard work or the cleaning or the work emails or the job search or whatever it is. You realize you can't do it all. And that's the point. That's the reality. You are not a machine. We can't do it all. But in the midst of that reality that we can't do it all, don't get paralyzed by not figuring out what a worshipful and restful Sabbath might look like for you. You need to do some things and not do some things in order to make a Sabbath. What are those things for you? Maybe start with writing down a few things to do to make a Sabbath, and then take a moment and write down a few things to not do, a few things to avoid. Now, those things may change over time, but don't be afraid to start somewhere. Sabbath helps us recognize how small we are. And if we miss that, we misunderstand the reality of who is dependent on who. When we believe that we sustain the world and God doesn't, well, then we find restlessness and unrest. And this is a horrific way to live. And I promise you, busyness will leave scars on your heart and on your body. Here's a tough truth about limits: you're not necessary. Now, let me clarify before you bristle too much at that. I'm provoking you intentionally here. Yes, your life matters. Yes. And you are of infinite worth and value. Yes, absolutely. But you're not necessary. The things you do, they're not really necessary. If you were to die tomorrow, I guarantee you the world would continue. You matter, but you're not necessary. That's our limit. But you know who is necessary? God. God, the creator, sustainer of everyone and everything. If he were to cease to exist, everything would fade away. God is necessary. We need someone to look us in the eye and tell us we've done enough. It's okay to stop and rest. That's the good news of the gospel. We somehow have this false notion that God likes good people, and we realize no one is perfect, but we think God forgives those who try hard enough. I can't use strong enough language today in a worship service to yell, "Not true!" This is not true. And I don't want your habits to form you into believing it. The idea that our work and our achievements and our products are what give us value, it's a lie. It's a lie that destroys our souls. So let's get this practical again and let's apply this. What is your next step with a weekly Sabbath? Let's take a moment, reflect on that, and discuss. I want to invite you into a weekly habit of Sabbath that invites you through Jesus to come and rest. Come and rest. Come and Sabbath with Jesus. Jesus comes to you first, which provides a peace that no amount of effort can buy. Jesus lived the good life that we're all trying to live. Jesus did it all. Jesus sacrificed everything for us. He said the right things. He did the right things. He knew what to do and where to go. And he gave his life for us. He did that for love, for you. Jesus endured the agony of a sleepless night in the Garden of Gethsemane, agonizing over what was going to happen so that you could rest. Jesus went willingly to the cross so you could rest. Jesus rose from the dead so that you could rest in your hopes and dreams not ending with your death. We look forward to celebrating Easter in a couple weeks, that Christ is risen. Because the resurrection changes everything, including our Sabbath rest. There are important things to be done. There are injustices to fight. There are people to show love. There are things to study and learn. There's good work to be done. There are habits to develop and cultivate. But all those things, well, they come out of God's love for us, not out of our own need. Here's what Sabbath does. Sabbath puts a feather in the cap of our habits, because it's a reminder that we don't do these habits out of a place of legalism or of earning anything. When you place habits before love and you have legalism. Place love before habits and you'll be filled with good news. God's love for us can change our habits. It can change the way we live. But the way we live will never change God's infinite love for us. And I don't know about you, but all the work of preaching this sermon reminds me, I think I have a hike to start.